Hello everyone, good afternoon. Could you just let us know if you can see the PowerPoint on the screen, please? I want to double check. Brilliant, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are on site today, so you might hear a little bit of background noise. We have told staff that we are in here, but if, as you'll know, if anything comes up, we might need to deal with that. But yeah, so just so you know, there might be a little bit of background noise. It's great to see so many people joining, and thank you for those who have already put their name in the chat. If you could just put your name in the chat and where you're from, or where you're joining us from, that would be really, really good. There will be a recording after the session, so if you need to access it or if you miss anything, that will be emailed out. And you can also drop any questions that you might have into the chat box. Tessa, who is looking at all the questions, will collate them and we'll have a little bit of time at the end to answer some questions. Those questions that we don't get a chance to answer, we will answer them later via email, and our email addresses will also be at the end of the presentation. Brilliant, thank you. So just going to the first slide. So we're here today to talk about school routines and managing change. I'm Corey Bulmer and I'm the Assistant Head of Tramp House School, which is based in Earlsfield in Wandsworth, South East London.
I'm Kat Bradley. I'm the Consultant Behaviour Analyst at Tramp House.
Thank you.
Okay, so do you want to put on here as well? So today we're talking about routines, school routines, and how we manage change. We're going to talk a bit about how we communicate routines to our learners, and we're going to go into a bit how we plan for changes to those routines, and then how we manage unplanned changes. So when something comes up that we weren't expecting, and how we support our learners with that situation.
Okay, so just to kind of break that down a little bit, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we communicate those routines, and how communicating those routines can create a really safe and familiar environment for our young people, so that learning can take place. And a few ways that we do that: we have timetables, which we can break down into weekly or daily. We also have now and next boards, now, next, and then boards, now boards. And we also use a range of objects of reference as well, depending on the need of that young person.
And that's really individualised. So which of those options your learners are going to be using will obviously vary quite a lot. So for some, a whole timetable of a whole day or a whole week might be too much information, too overwhelming. And now a sort of a smaller field with just what's happening now, what's next might be more appropriate. Some might find it too difficult to have the next thing on and might just be focusing on, okay, what's happening right now. That's obviously can change over time. So you might start with a now board just to introduce the visuals and the kind of systems, and then move on to now next. And then eventually people might find a whole day or a whole week timetable more appropriate, and they might be visual schedules, they might have photos, they might have symbols, they might be written, and we're going to talk about some of those options now.
There you go.
So once you know your learners the best, right? So once you've sort of looked at what their preferred method of communication is, whether they respond well to symbols, whether they respond well to photos, whether they prefer written communication, how you structure their routines and their day is also really important. So we want to be ensuring a mix of less preferred and higher preferred activities. And where those come in the day is also quite important. So you might want to put your really highly preferred activities, at least the first activity of the day, ideally will be one of them, just so that you start the day on a positive note. Your learner comes into school, the first thing they're doing on the timetable is something that they really enjoy doing, to start off the day on a positive note, and sort of build momentum for the rest of the day. You might also want to put something preferred at the end of the day, so you end on a high, they leave school feeling really positive. But that will vary a lot. Sorry.
I was going to say, we always use the example of maths, which probably, if we have got any maths teachers, I do apologise, but maybe not finishing the day with an activity that they don't enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That does vary a lot for individuals. So, for example, for someone who struggles to transition from school at the end of the day, maybe you're not going to want to put their favourite thing right at the end, because that's going to make that transition even more difficult if they have to leave from something they really enjoy to then the transition which they already find difficult. So it's really individualised, and yeah, so we'll look a bit different for each learner. We also want to embed choice throughout the day to really support pupils with their engagement and their enjoyment. So for work tasks, is there any flexibility in your service for them being able to choose what they're doing at certain points of the day? And can they be involved in the writing of the timetable as well? Can they help write it? Can they help schedule the visuals? So really making sure that they've got as much choice as possible. Obviously within school there are schedules that people need to adhere to, but if there's any one-to-one time or time when they've got a bit more choice, please try and include that where you can.
And also with any timetable, just always remember to refer back to it throughout the day. So we're using it at every transition, we're using it when that young person might become a little bit dysregulated, or even when they're enjoying the day, so it really becomes well embedded. It's the same way as any of us. We start our work day, we come in, we might write a list, we might have I have a selection of post-it notes which I'll take off and put in the bin once I've completed it, and it's just having that anchor that young person can keep going back to throughout the day to know, this is the point I'm at right now, this is the next point that I've got coming up. So it becomes a really, really natural part of the day that they've got autonomy over and that they can interact with independently when needed. Also make sure that we have movement breaks and access to sensory diets if that pupil requires them. So making sure that if they've done a table work activity, that we're then following on with something that's going to meet their sensory needs, so they continue to stay regulated and in that ready for learning zone. Okay, just moving on to the Now and Next board. So we have different stages with the Now and Next. So you have your Now, which is for the pupils who need to know exactly what's happening right now, but haven't yet developed those skills to access a Now and Next board. And then after the Now and Next board, you have a Now, Next and Then board as well. We use a range of different visuals, photos and symbols depending on the need of that young person. And as Kat had previously mentioned, it's about finding which one works best for that individual and which one they prefer. So if there's anyone here from any mainstream settings, my previous role, I worked in a mainstream school, and we had a few pupils who didn't like to, who needed the visuals, who needed that transitional support, but didn't want their peers to know. So it's how you do it discreetly or in an age appropriate way. So we use Widget for our visuals, but it might be that a young person would prefer to use emojis, and there's free websites you can use to download them. So the same emojis they would use on their phone or WhatsApp, or when they're talking to their friends on Snapchat, anything like that, you can use them instead. You can also make it quite discreet, so you could put it on a key ring, or you can have it as a bookmark in their diary. So there's different ways that you can you make it functional for each individual pupil. I'm sorry.
You also want to be thinking about what you're transitioning from or what you're transitioning to. So even with all these visuals, timetables in place, that alone might be not enough to support a learner who struggles with transitioning from one activity to another, and not enough to sort of ensure their cooperation with it. So as we talked about in the previous slide, with your mix of highly preferred and preferred, that might be something to look at if your learner is struggling to transition from activity to activity in the day. And as Corey was saying about those sort of resources being really important, that all feeds into, we really want our pupils to be assenting to the processes that we're using. So if they do prefer one over the other, incorporating that choice in. Something we do see often is there's a history, a sometimes negative history with visual resources. For example, if a learner has historically struggled with transitions, with transitioning from one place to another, perhaps those visuals haven't been used a lot in the day, but they always come out at that time of day when they're struggling to transition, and there becomes an association there between, oh, you know, those visuals remind me of that time when I was struggling to transition. So if that's the case, and when you're getting visuals out, or you're getting timetables out, and your learners are showing you that they don't want to engage with those resources, but you think that it would be useful for them to know about what's happening. It's always useful, right, to know what your day looks like. You might need to start with sort of helping those visuals be positive again. So maybe you would start off with only bringing that visual out when your learner is engaging with something they really enjoy. So maybe it's break time, they really enjoy that. They're playing with their friends, that's when the visual comes out. So, oh, we're on break now. Or they really enjoy their swimming sessions, and actually the visual only comes out when they go into swimming, so that you're undoing some of that learning history of visuals only coming out at difficult times of day. And then when you've gone through that process and you can see that the visuals are less aversive, then you can start building up to your sort of longer timetables.
Brilliant. Then just looking a little bit at objects of reference, which we usually see more with our young people with PMLD, so profound and multiple learning disabilities, and those who are unable to access the symbols and images that we use on our next board or now board. So when we're using objects of reference, it's really important to make sure that the student engages with them independently. So if you are transitioning to an art class, use a paintbrush or a palette, whatever it might be. That young person can then take that paintbrush, interact with it independently, and carry it to the transition to really enforce what that transition is. Generally, the object isn't massively important. It's their association with that object that they build over time. So if you've got some transitions that, you know, what object would you use, you can think creatively about that, as long as they then associate it with what that transition is. Obviously, we've got some simple ones like lunch, we might use a plastic fork, or break, we might use a cup. But if you've got any other transitions where you're thinking, what could I use, don't worry too much about that. It's more about them building that association up over time. As well, what can work really nicely for pupils who need objects of reference but also need access to a full day planner. In the past, I've seen it done where you could have like a long big piece of Velcro in every transition kind of next to their workstation, and at the end of each transition they take it off and put it in a bag to say, right, it's finished, and then they can slowly see the end of their day, which might be some keys, or, you know, a little shape of a house or something 3D. You could also, as well, to kind of reinforce learning and hopefully develop the pupil to understand visuals and symbols, moving forward, you can attach a symbol to that object of reference. So hopefully over time, you know, they associate the cup with break, but you've also got a symbol of the cup attached to it. So maybe long term, you can then remove the cup and then you can solely just use that symbol. So it's a nice way to break that down a little bit. Yeah. So I'll just move to the next one. There you go.
So our day-to-day routines are also a great chance to learn new skills and encourage independence. So, for example, preparing your own lunch, or when you come into school, putting your belongings away, and because those things are happening every day, it's a real, great like natural learning opportunities there. So we want to be looking at breaking those activities down into the steps needed, and following the same steps every time. So particularly if there's multiple member of staff working with a learner, or maybe there's cover staff coming in, just making sure that everyone is following the same steps of that routine, just so that learner is getting exposure in the same way every day. For example, if you're making your lunch, you start with washing your hands, getting your equipment out. How much support your learner needs with those routines might vary. You can model the steps to support them if they're not able to engage in those independently yet. And you want to be trying to fade the support that you're giving. So maybe on the first day of making their lunch, with the first step being washing hands, you might model that and start washing your hands to show them. Maybe the following day, you might just hold back a little bit, or walk towards the sink, but not actually wash your hands, and see if they're able to complete that step independently. And then so that you're fading your support over time and they're engaging in those parts of their routine more independently.
Brilliant. Another thing you could also do with activity-based routines, if you're using a visual, is having it kind of like a to-do list, so they can tick off each one and they can clearly see the end. You might also want to consider how many steps you're including. So some pupils might be able to access an activity that's got 8 steps. Some pupils might be starting off with activities that have 2 steps. So you can slowly build up those steps over time. But again, it's about making sure it's interactive for the young person who's engaging with it, and they clearly understand, right, I finished step 1, I'm moving on to step 2, and then you can build on them frequently. So planning for change. So
you've got all those things in place. Your learners got their daily routines, they've got their timetables, their schedules that are supporting them with those routines. However, things happen. Changes happen in life, and that we haven't always, we're not always expecting them, and that can be really difficult for anyone. If you're a commuter and you sit in the same spot on the train every day, and you turn up and someone else is sitting in your seat, and it disrupts your morning, or if your favourite coffee shop is closed, or the shop is closed when you were expecting to go. These things happen all the time. Things happen that you're not expecting, and that can be really difficult for our learners. They can really value their routines, and it can be really difficult when changes to those routines occur. So rather than just waiting for those inevitable changes to happen, we want to be exposing them to that and programming for that right from the start, rather than waiting for the unplanned thing. So we've got some strategies.
One thing you could try is having a question mark or a blank space on that timetable or the now next to them board, whatever that young person's using, and building the suspense over what that question mark could be. So you're really, throughout the day, you're making it a little bit of a game, and you know, the activity that they end up doing should always be something desired and motivating to start with, and so they're associating that question mark, or, oh, what's coming. It's got a positive association with that. Another thing that we find really important is having countdown calendars before different holidays. Now, for a lot of our young people, time and what month we're in and those kind of things can be a little bit of a barrier, but our students might have different anchors which let them know where we are. So for some of our pupils, it might be they see a Christmas tree, they know it's, you know, they know they're going to be off for 2 weeks. They know that there's a break coming. Easter, you know, they might see Easter eggs around, so they know there's going to be another break coming there. And it's about how we communicate that for our pupils, but also for our parents as well, and it can make that interactive when they're at home.
And that communication with parents is really important when you're coming towards the end of term, or coming back after holidays, and you can incorporate that into your planning and your resources. So if parents let you know that they're going to be staying with the child's granny for a few days in the school holidays, you can incorporate into their resources, into what you're talking about. So when you're preparing for these changes coming up, you're giving clear guidance on what might be happening. And we also want to be, so preparing in that way. We also want to be practicing last minute changes. So all the calendars and the timetables with some flexibility are sort of a bit more in advance, so they can see that that's what's going to change. But we also want to be prepping for, okay, you thought you were going to be doing this activity, but something has happened last minute. How do we help you manage that? Again, start with less preferred activities being the change. So you were expecting, I'm going to use maths again, you were expecting maths at 11 o'clock. And that's quite a difficult session for you. You're engaging in it and you're doing well, but it's not your favourite session of the day. And that's that's actually now not happening today. We're going to do this thing that you really enjoy instead. So we start off with the sort of last minute changes or last minute cancellations being something that hopefully is a bit easier. You do though really want to build that up so that eventually learners are able to cope with even their very highly preferred things changing. I guess we've talked about this quite a bit in terms of less preferred and preferred. You want to be thinking of almost like a hierarchy of, okay, what's your learner's favourite thing in the world, what's their least favourite thing, and what are all the items and activities in between that, so that you can work on preparing for these changes.
That kind of leads into our last slide, I think, which is responding to unexpected changes in routine. Yeah.
So you've been practicing this, right? You've been practicing and helping your learner with what happens if there's a last minute change to their routine. That's great, but then you're probably going to have some situations where you haven't planned and routines do change. So it's really important to model calm behaviour. It's a lot easier said than done. If you're worried, and you're thinking, oh, this isn't happening today, and I know that's going to be really difficult. But your pupils might respond to that. So try and keep your body language relaxed and open, smile, have your shoulders down. Try and make sure you're at their level, so you're not standing over them, you're sitting next to them explaining what's happened. And use the pupil's preferred method to explain the change. So that might be, those visuals we talked about, objects of reference. They might be a sign user, Makaton user. Use simple language and allow pauses to assess the impact of your words, to give them some processing time. And for some learners, you might need to adapt your communication when they're dysregulated. So we see this quite a lot. We might have learners who use vocal communication throughout their day, are very conversational, are quite confident in their vocal communication, but actually when they're dysregulated, that's no longer their preferred method. They might need less vocals, they might need visual backups and other communication backups. So that's just something to bear in mind when helping your learners responding to unexpected changes.
I was just going to highlight, I think that the processing time is probably the most important part, because I think if you've got a teacher or a teaching assistant, or what we call TLP, working with that young person and they're struggling to transition, you then can see a lot more communication sometimes used. And really, if we really strip that back and allow that young person to understand what that transition is going to look like and where they're going, and keep referring back to it, it can be really supportive long term.
And just a last point, that if there is an unexpected change to a routine, try and offer something highly preferred instead. So I understand this isn't happening, I understand that's really difficult for you, we can go and do this. The swimming pool's shut, you love swimming, we're going to go on a trip to the park instead. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And that is the end of our lunch and learn. So we've got a few minutes, I think. Oh, we've got 5 minutes if anyone's got any questions. So Tessa, I don't know if there's any questions. Any questions that we don't get to as well, we will respond as well. No questions have popped up. Okay, no problem. Well, if anyone does have any questions, please see our email addresses attached there, and we can respond to any.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Anyway.
We just wanted to let you learn about the next lunch and learn as well.
Yeah.
So this is really exciting. We've got.
Oh, we've got a question.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Brilliant. We've got the question. Any tips for professionals working in schools but not based in schools? Working in schools but not based in schools. Could you clarify a little bit? Any tips for professionals working in schools but not based in schools? Oh, right, okay. So if you're like someone external who comes in to do an assessment, is what I'm kind of thinking.
I mean, I think as much information as you can get from the service before you go in is always really useful. What their routines look like, what their pupils are struggling within that routine, and also, again, what the pupils, I assume you're going to go and see pupils, what they like is really important. If you can turn up with something that they really enjoy, that's going to sort of help you build rapport. I'm assuming you're maybe going in to see a pupil, observe them in school. You
could also, it's not that I've seen this, but now you've raised it, it's a really good point. If you had a picture of yourself before a visit, so we could prepare that young person and say, right, okay, this person's coming to see you, this is what they look like, or even a general social story that then could be adapted by the team who know that young person really well, would actually be really good practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the next question is, any thoughts on supporting children who are communicatively able but get very anxious about the unknown? Anything beyond a visual timetable?
Communicative but get very anxious about the unknown.
Anything beyond the visual timetable?
I guess practicing with.
I think going back to what we kind of had said. So I think the first thing for me would be to make sure you've got a transition system in place that's really robust and is working for that young person. So you're really allowing them to feel safe and secure, and you're not kind of using the question mark, as we kind of said earlier on, straight away, and then slowly over time you can start building that up. But I wouldn't then have it on the timetable first thing, so they're waiting all day for that. Maybe you would have it at the start of the day when you get there. So you'll do like a 5-minute activity, then it's a question mark, and then slowly you build that 5 minutes up longer over time.
Yeah, I mean, if they're able to communicate with you about how they prefer to plan their day and manage routines, then that would be great. And I think, again, that coming back to that practice, can you practice some small situations that are unknown but with positive situations, like something's happening later, it's really fun, building lots of momentum, and then it ends up being a really positive activity. So the unknown stops being, over time the unknown starts to become something that's positively associated with fun activities.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. I think that's all the time we have, all we have time for, but if anyone does have any questions we haven't got to, we will email any answers out next week.
And our next Lunch and Learn is on the 30th of January at 12:30. We're really excited. We've got a guest speaker, Stephanie Camilleri. She's founder at the ADHD Advocate. And she's going to go into unlocking potential, understanding and supporting ADHD and autism. So we're really excited about that. So hope to see you there.
Brilliant. Thank you everyone. Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend. Bye.